Thank you, Caroline, and good morning, everybody. I'd also like to thank Clara, who's going to be in charge of driving the slides this morning. So we'll make a good double act. So Clara, if I can ask you to move to the next slide. What I hope to cover this morning with you all is, I suppose, just setting a little bit of context as to why tourism matters. A little bit of a look on the outlook. I will advocate that this it comes with serious health warnings because it's still a bit of crystal ball gazing at the moment. And then I suppose probably the crux of the session is around building tourism back better. So we'll go into that a bit more. Go to the next slide. So firstly is why tourism matters. If you go to the next slide, Clara, thank you. I mean, as Caroline said there, we have been devastated by COVID. But if you take a look at pre-COVID, tourism has been hugely important to the Irish economy and actually employs 260,000, delivering 7.8 billion in expenditure. And what this really means in terms of an economy is that it's 1.8 billion in exchequer revenue, which works out like at about 1,000 per household. So it's like every household contributing. So it's hugely important. But really where we find it a particular value is that tourism benefits parts of Ireland that other sectors don't. It sustains communities and drives regional development that other industries would struggle to deliver. So it makes it hugely important and very significant and something that we want to make sure we recover from in a post-COVID world. Next slide, Clara. And I suppose the thing is Ireland does tourism very well. It's quite we have a long tradition in it, and we've always done it well, and always, I suppose, punched above our weight in terms of where the volume and visitor numbers that we get. So in terms of, we have a 2-to-1 ratio of overseas tourists to domestic residents. This is less than in Scotland, and it's less than 1-to-1 in Scotland and New Zealand, and we have a 2-to-1 ratio of domestic to population as well. So it's very important. But I suppose also what really matters, and something that we're very conscious of measuring, is satisfaction rates. And while it's important that our tourists have a high satisfaction rates, it is also equally important that our residents and locals have equally a high satisfaction rate of it. And I suppose the point in that, what helps us to do that and make sure it's sustainable, is that we have a better than average performance on seasonality and regionality. And if you go to the next slide, you can just show you here in terms of regionality. As you'll see here, the map on the left shows our population density, and the map on the right shows our tourism density. And I suppose Ireland's population is skewed to the east of the country, where our tourism counteracts that skew, which just shows that we've got great proportionality and working very well. If you go to the next slide, we look at seasonality. And again, we see here that compared to a lot of destinations, we have an enviable season spread of demand. Now, don't get me wrong, we still have a peak season and an off-peak season, and I'm sure many businesses would rather we had more, a bigger stretch. But it is important, and it helps us manage the volumes better to have that spread, making it, the sector more viable, but also employment more sustainable, which is very important. So moving along to the next slide, what we feel is really important. Sorry, if you just go back one, skipped a couple there. Sorry, back another one, Clara, sorry. Oh, sorry. Apologies, I must have missed a slide. I must have deleted it by accident myself. What I wanted to share with you is actually its residents' view of tourism. And I suppose this is important in the sense that, we do research this to make sure that our citizens and communities where tourists come to are happy with it. And 1 in 3 say that their community is more vibrant and friendly place to live because of tourism. And 2 in 5 believe that more local businesses are able to stay open and keep their people and their residents in the area so that they don't have to move to more urban areas. So sorry, moving on then to the outlook. So if I just, next slide, thanks, Clara. So the long-term view is, look, that you can see here from this graph is that tourism always kind of has peaks and troughs, but we always recover stronger. And I suppose the difficulty now is how do we determine how we will recover from COVID? That's kind of harder. So if you move to the next slide, we'll show that the outlook for Europe, and really what it is it's all vaccine dependent. And the vaccine benefits are more likely to be seen from Q3 onwards. And what we'll probably see here is that international travelers will choose destinations closer to home. And usually, normally after some, when we have a blip in the way, like recessions, stuff like that, it always tends to be the business tourism that can come back first. But actually, on this instance, and I suppose seeing as we're all doing virtual conferences and stuff now, we do think it'll be the leisure traveller that will lead the way rather than the business traveller. So that is a change that we haven't experienced in previous peaks and troughs. So if you look at the next slide, you'll see the outlook by region for Europe, and you can see that whether you're looking at Europe, Western Europe, or Eastern Europe, really we're not looking to see I suppose, returning that negativity into to 2024. Now, looking at a more Irish basis, if we go to the next slide, you can see here that we, the agencies ourselves and Tourism Ireland and our own government department haven't made any predictions yet, but ITIC, our colleagues in ITIC have done, which is the Irish Tourism Industry Confederation. And they've kind of looked at, sorry, Clara, if you go to the next slide. Sorry, they've looked at 3 scenarios. There's a baseline, which sees no international tourism flow before September 21. And it kind of has a mixed market response due to uneven vaccine rollouts. There's an optimistic one, which we all hope will be what's true, and it sees vaccine restrictions removed from July 21 and an on-schedule vaccine rollout in Ireland, but also in our source markets. And then the downside is seeing a much more delayed start, and I suppose seeing different virus surges and low vaccine effectiveness. So if you move to the next slide, you can see how that is kind of predicted. But I suppose the important bit is it does see recovery, although it may not see us recovering back to the extremely high peaks that we had in 2019 until 24 to 25. That slide there shows visitor numbers, and if you go to the next slide, Clara, it looks at revenue. So I suppose on a positive side, it does show that we will recover. It just may take us perhaps longer than we would like. But as anything, it's only speculation, and we will have facts more later on. Looking at the next slide, this would show you the domestic market. And this is where we probably see this coming back a lot quicker than international markets. As I mentioned earlier, people are looking closer to home. So we do think, that on the upside, we could be back to 2019 levels in 2022, on a downside in 2023. But actually what we are hoping from this, and I'll share later with our own strategy, is that actually domestic could come back stronger than previously before, which would be very important, and also help that seasonality and spread throughout the year. So going to the next section about building tourism back better. What I just want to take you through here is, I suppose, looking at a change in context. So the pandemic has dramatically changed the policy context, and I suppose we are seeing this crisis has made many countries explore the opportunity to fast track the move to greener and more sustainable tourism development. And what is important for that is that we have an integrated approach to tourism policy. And I suppose what is being seen, and this is right across the board, no longer is this niche or something to look at in the future, is that there's a greater emphasis being played on environmental sustainability, diversification, innovation, and prioritizing the visitor management, particularly over visitor numbers. And I suppose this would be something that we would have seen ourselves in our own time, in terms of we have different experience brands around the country, regional brands. For example, with Ireland's Hidden Heartland, we would have tested this on locals as much as we've tested this on consumers, because it is very, very important that communities are behind it. And moving to the next slide, I'd just like to show, I suppose what I am delighted to say, in the sense that in Ireland, COVID hasn't made us react to this. We were already in that position, which puts us in a strong position. And we had our own tourism department have been developing tourism policy statement, people policy in place, which is growing tourism from 2019 to 2025. And in this, it already was placing tourism as a key element of our economic strategy. But more importantly, it was reflecting that this needs to be done against the higher standards of environmental and economic sustainability. So we have been recognizing and developing that. And to do that, the next slide, please, Clara, there's a sustainable working group was established to put an action plan in place, looking at international policy and best practice, and developing an ambition for Ireland. And our ambition is to seek to be amongst the world's leaders in sustainable tourism practices. We have developed 8 principles on that, and Maria Amelia is in the next session, and she's going to take you through that. So I won't ruin her suspense, but it does show, I suppose, what's important with the sustainable working group was that it was made up of the agencies of the department, our government, but also industry. So it is that joined up thinking, because that is needed if we actually are going to deliver on this. Moving to the next slide, you'll see here that, I suppose, in Fáilte, we have always implemented the VICE model. As a development agency, it's very, very important for us that we manage our development in a sustainable and integrated manner. And that involves making sure we consider the visitor, the industry, the community, and the environment. And I suppose it is hugely important. Why we know visitors come to Ireland is for our landscape and our heritage. They're our greatest tourism asset, and we need to make sure that we maintain them, we protect them, but also that we make them accessible, not just for now, but for future generations, or else we will not have a sustainable tourism sector. So I'd like to take you through now, and the next slide is, I suppose, given COVID, we've had to redevelop our own strategy in Fáilte, and there is 8 pillars. I'm going to go to two in detail, but I'm going to run through them all briefly. I'm going to pull in detail out the opening the doors and reduce the carbon footprint. But just to go through the first ones, survive to thrive is key in the sense that, if we don't help our businesses survive this pandemic, we won't have any businesses to be there for a recovery. And we have to make sure that they are there and that they're working that way. Accelerating domestic tourism is pivotal in the sense that if international visitors aren't coming, the only way our tourism sector can survive is if our citizens and our locals take domestic holidays. But this is where you've also got to, look at every disaster as an opportunity. Can we not just utilize that to sustain this summer, but also accelerate that so that more and more are taking staycations in future years and helping out on that side of things? On the digital, this is an opportunity, again, something we've been focusing on, but again, it's led by COVID in the sense that more and more people want contactless and stuff like that. And it's harnessing that and I suppose expediting that online presence and e-commerce capability amongst our industry. As I mentioned, we will recover from this. We always recover and recover stronger, but we have to have a pipeline. And as we know in pipelines, you can't start the pipeline once recovery. You need to start that ahead of time because capital development or organizing events and that take time to do. So it's important that we have a pipeline and industry are building on this pipeline for future international business. Naturally, with COVID, it's taught us all that we need to stay safe. So we need to ensure that we're best in class, both in virus safe tourism, but also for both our visitors, but for our people employed in the industry and also communities. Communities want to be comfortable in welcoming visitors to their area, and they won't if they feel that they are bringing a virus. So we have to manage that. And like everything, we have to make sure that we deliver everything that we do in best in class. So just on to my next slide there, I'm going to delve a little bit further into 2 of these key pillars. One is opening the outdoors, and the other is reducing carbon footprint. And I suppose just looking on the outdoors first, and Aidan will probably go into this a little bit more, so I won't ruin what he's going to say as well. We've worked very closely on a number of things, but we have recognised, that businesses will only survive, COVID through the outdoor environment. We've also seen through COVID that more and more people are being active outdoors, which is fantastic. But really, what we need to do is figure out how we can open spaces more. And this is what has been hit most by COVID is our urban centres. So we need to regenerate these, open up our urban centres, both for daytime and nighttime, and make them much more places that people are proud of, and that sense of pride, and open them up to communities and visitors. So that's going to be done in kind of 2 different ways. One is, I've called it outdoor dining here, but it's looking to how we reimagine these urban and town centre places to be more welcoming and facilitate more communities and visitors to congregate in a safe way, but just to feel that sense of pride and that this is their place, their home. And also outdoor infrastructure and accessibility. And by this, I mean, is developing walking and cycling to be motivating attractors, to develop and promote water experiences, and all that goes with that, and particularly a lot of our own state assets. We recently launched, only last week, a 19 million capital scheme where we are developing 22 locations around the country for water-based facilities, opening up those assets and making sure that people are able to enjoy them. And it's key that we start to recognise that we need to protect our landscape, but we also need to make it accessible in a way that manages it carefully. In terms of reducing the carbon footprint, what we recognise is that there's a huge need to increase renewable energy use and reduce emissions in waste, energy and transport. And I suppose that's why we focus on this in this pillar. And we developed three work programmes in that regard. The first is drive change through knowledge and metrics. And I suppose that's very, very key. We, as part of the EU, Ireland will have a target around climate change and carbon emissions, but we need to know what is the tourism element of that. So therefore, that we can then establish tracking and reporting systems so that we can measure on that, and also make sure that we have developed carbon calculators for visitors and businesses to be able to understand their impact, and then see what they can do to mitigate that. And always what's important is very much is that knowledge and sharing knowledge. And we forget that a lot of times in tourism, businesses are quite small, and they're trying to survive. So it's important that we gather that knowledge and we make it easily accessible, and have a repository of information for businesses to be able to access that and help themselves. The second program there is drive change at the level of the business. While we will work, and I mentioned there's a working group from a government perspective and an agency perspective and a top line industry perspective to really make an impact, that has to be done at the level of the business. But that's where we come in to help businesses do that. And that's by rolling out programs of supports to help and trial businesses to try new things and to see its impact and understand how it can change. But also maybe to overcome those barriers, whether they may be through incentives or capex schemes, and working that way to see how we do that. And I suppose key is that there's no point in doing this work if we don't measure it and see its impact, and it's making sure that we have a reporting mechanism with industry to see that we are making the impacts that we're trying to achieve. One of the things we are looking at in Ireland as well here is could we, while it's important to do at the level of the businesses, could we also looking at having a number of destinations that could be best in class? And this is maybe where you nearly expand outside of tourism, but it could be the driving force, and you bring others with you to make that destination best in class in terms of sustainability. That will enable our colleagues in Tourism Ireland to be able to promote Ireland a lot easier in that regard too. And finally, in transport, this is key, really, because we have to offer visitors alternative transport options. Unfortunately, we're an island, so people either have to fly or get the ferry here. So we have to see how we can make it easier to get around in a much more sustainable way. And that can be a number of things, in the sense that it is looking at local transport in particular. And local links, we as I showed earlier in our map, where a lot of our tourism is in rural areas, we have to make sure that there's better public transport and linking towns to the attractions, and similarly trailheads in terms of walking and cycle routes. Also, a lot of our landscape, you may notice, and our key attractions is in peninsulas. We're bringing people down to a dead end. So we need to look at alternatives like park and rides and inclusions like that to see how we can facilitate better sustainability there. And similarly, we need to look at the whole area of electric vehicles, both from a public transport perspective, but also for visitors. So, improve and increase the accesses of e-charging points, both for cars and bikes around the country. And one of the things we're looking at is a feasibility study to see actually how easy is it for someone to travel around Ireland on a typical touring route, and where we then need to put those charging points in there to make that easier, and similarly on public transport. So, conscious I only had a short period of time, but I just wanted to tell you, I suppose, our brief story. If you go to my last slide there, Clara. And I suppose, Ireland has a strong story to tell, and it is about integrated policy with industry and a community approach. Together we can, change our story. Together we can green Ireland's tourism strategy, and together we can build tourism back better. So thank you very much.